Hello, salam, haleshuma chetore, which is about what I know of Farsi.
That's very good.
Welcome to the latest of the Zoom events organized by the International Manifesto Group. The title, as you all know, is Iran and Cuba Promoting Solidarity. And our event also marks the 43rd anniversary of the historic Iranian Revolution. And it marks as well the international book launch of the Farsi translation of Arnold August's book, Cuba-US Relations. This event is sponsored by the International Manifesto Group, and we also have a number of co-sponsors. They include the US Peace Council, the Black Alliance for Peace, and our official media sponsor is the Canada Files. My name is Radhika Desai, and I convene the International Manifesto Group. Today, I'm speaking to you from Winnipeg in Canada, which you should all know stands on the stolen lands of the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Ojibwe, the Dakota, and the Dene peoples, and is also the homeland of the Métis Nation. The International Manifesto Group was created as a discussion group at the start of the pandemic to discuss the unfolding of the broader economic, social, political, and international crises that it was accelerating and bringing to a head. Over the last almost 2 years, we have also written a manifesto. It is entitled Through Pluripolarity Towards Socialism. And I encourage you all to take a look at it. Here is the URL. I'm putting it, I'm putting the URL in the chat. Give me a second. And I encourage you all to read it and consider reading it and consider signing it. It's not very long. It'll take you about an hour to read. It has been translated into many languages already, and I'm happy to announce that thanks to Arnold's efforts and I think Muhammad's efforts, the Farsi translation is now among them. So they are all on the same URL that I have posted in the chat. One of the themes that the International Manifesto Group pays a lot of attention to is the long battle between imperialism and anti-imperialism. And it has been particularly good at pointing out the fact that the hold of imperialism on the world order is slipping. We saw this so graphically recently in Afghanistan. And the events as they unfolded in Afghanistan, as the US lost its control over the puppet regime it had created and the puppet army that it had been funding to such a great degree. All of these events also reminded us that the United States, which began playing a critically important part in the exercise of imperialism since the early 20th century and began leading the effort since the end of the Second Cold War, has never actually won a single war. We are also seeing that grip slipping today in the US-Russia confrontation over Ukraine. The US is keeping up an extremely dangerous, shrill, and high decibel rhetoric of against Russia, accompanying it with all sorts of hypocritical words about democracy and human rights. It is sending troops and nuclear-capable bombers and warships to the region. It is making threatening noises about what it will do if Russia does this or that. However, as we all know, Russia has insisted repeatedly it has no intention of invading any country. Even the present Ukrainian government, which like all those after 2014 is usually eager to run and hide in the skirts of the imperialist powers, particularly the United States, is actually asking the United States to stop creating such a dangerous situation. The NATO alliance is visibly crumbling as various European leaders go visiting President Putin on their own, presumably making sure that their national interests are secured. And even some of the post-communist countries which belong to NATO and tend to be extremely anti-Russia have been breaking ranks with NATO on this matter. Still, the crisis is kept going, and every hour the crisis is kept going, it increases the risk of war through miscalculation or desperation. What all this shows us is that a declining imperialism is not necessarily less dangerous. Indeed, it may get more so as it gets more incoherent and more desperate. The long story of the battle between imperialism and its opponents is certainly in a critically important phase. And the Iranian Revolution of 1979 was a very important milestone in this battle, a very important part of the gains made by anti-imperialist forces. It upended the American order in the Middle East. And for the next many decades, the absorption of the United States in the Middle East region gave other parts of the world, particularly Latin America, some breathing room. And as we know, one of the major results of that was that it gave room for progressive developments to emerge, particularly the development we know as the pink tide, the election of a series of left of center governments, some more radical than others, of course, in the Latin American region. By fighting their battle against imperialism, Iranians have paid a heavy price for their defiance of imperialist designs. However, we also know that their efforts have not been in vain. Today, we see with greater clarity than ever before that an anti-imperialist alliance is being formed with Iran and Russia, of course, but also, with China and Russia, of course, but also important other countries like Iran, like Venezuela, like Cuba. And these are acting together increasingly against imperialism. And as imperialism is losing its coherence, they are gaining theirs. And so among these alliances is the increasing closeness and cooperation between Iran, which came out against imperialism, as we know, in '79, and Cuba, which had been fighting that fight from 2 decades earlier. So welcome again to Iran and Cuba Promoting Pluripolarity, which is also the international book launch of the Farsi translation of Cuba-US relations. I should like to add that while I'm delighted to host this and I'm eager to listen to our excellent group of speakers, most of the organization of this event was done by Arnold August. So a big thank you to you, Arnold. Now, our speakers will be addressing these battles against imperialism, the alliances that have been formed, and the wider struggle that is taking place. And we have, all things going well, a total of 9 speakers. So we have a slightly heavy program, but Arnold has worked with each of them to figure out exactly how long they will speak for. And there are strict time limits for each speaker. So I will be, with apologies to speakers, much as I hate cutting off anyone, I will be requesting you to keep to your time limits. Please note that we are recording this event for later to put up later on our websites, and it is also being live streamed on YouTube. After the speakers have finished speaking, we will have a question and answer session. So we look forward to that as well, which is often the perhaps the most important part of the meeting. So I will now go to our first speaker and I will introduce him, and I will be introducing each of the speakers as they come up. So Arnold, is Ali Abu Talibi here? Okay, I presume that they are not here. So I will go to the second speaker. And so our second speaker is, which is now our first speaker, is Mohammad Ghorbani, who translated the book we are celebrating in part today. So Mohammad is the translator of books from English to Farsi, including Who Killed Che by Michael Ratner and Michael Stephen Smith, and Cuba-US Relations by Arnold August. He has written many articles in progressive Latin American and ALBA countries. He's a peace, justice, and anti-war activist, a pro-working people, and somebody who is a defender of the independence of nations and in favor of anti-imperialist multipolarization, or to use the term that we prefer, which is a term of Hugo Chavez's, towards pluripolarity. He's a supporter of the Iranian Revolution of 1979 with its progressive Islamic characteristics and the role it played in the region. And Mohammed will speak for about 9 minutes. So Mohammed, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thanks for the introduction, introducing me. And I would like to thank the organizers of today's event and all the participants. I especially would like to thank Arnold August for allowing me to translate his book. As you mentioned, prior to this book, I translated some articles and his writings that was published in Iran in some publications, and also in social media. When Arnold was launching his book in New York City, I asked a friend of mine to get me a copy of his book, Cuba-US Relations. And that happened. I read the book and I realized that there are a lot of similarities in the way US is treating Iranian revolution and the Cubans. So I thought it's a good idea to translate it and let the people know of both experiences. This would help us to understand the enemy better. I also would like to thank August for a few more things he did. He wrote a preface to the Persian edition and also introduced me to our comrade Luis Toledo Sande from Cuba, who also wrote an epilogue for the book for this Farsi edition. So, and not only that, I appreciate what Arnold did and chose today's date for the launching of the book. That means a lot to us Iranians on the occasion of the 43rd anniversary of the Iranian Revolution. I have to add that I have to thank Mr. Abu Talebi, who did the editing and also publishing the book with the Mazmoon publishers. Without his help, it was this task was not possible. From now on, I'm going to read from my notes. I think it's faster this way. You know, yesterday, millions of Iranian people participated in celebrating the 43rd anniversary of the Iranian Revolution. They did this by motorbike parade, by rallies where it was possible due to pandemic, and with the car parade. And this was amazing. I was watching him on TV, and genuinely millions of people participated in that. The Iranian Revolution changed not only the socio-political situation of Iran, but that of the entire region. Iran was a major member of the Central Pact, and the Shah was known to be the gendarme of the region. Prior to the revolution, there were some 60,000 American military and security personnel in Iran, and they turned Iran into an anti-Soviet base. Right after the revolution, Iran left this Central Treaty and joined the non-aligned movement. Within 24 hours, Pakistan, another member of the Central Treaty, left the organization, and therefore it was dissolved in March of 1979. It was a couple of months after the victory of the revolution. Well, the popular Iranian revolution under the leadership of Ayatollah Khomeini, inspired many people and movements across the Middle East, Africa, and beyond. The reason for this was that the crucial character of helping the oppressed, what we call mustazafin, and fight to defeat the oppressed, which we call here mustakbirin, or the oppressors. And this is meant to be anywhere in the world. It was also reflected in the Constitution of the Islamic Republic of Iran. For the same reason, enemies of the revolution, US, British, and their allies started to destabilize the country by war, sanctions, assassinations, terror and killing of revolutionary leaders, and so on. But the revolution turned Iran from an important ally of and friend of the US into an enemy of the US. So naturally, they started to demonize Iran and its leader. They tried to isolate Iran, not because it was an Islamic republic, but because it was of the nature and the character of the type of Islam that Ayatollah Khomeini was presenting. The Islam of resistance against imperialism. I should add that the Shia Islam played a significant role in mobilizing people in cities and in rural areas. Islam became a material force adapted to present time. I don't know if I have a couple more minutes or no.
Only one.
Okay. Right after the revolution, the Israeli embassy turned into an embassy of the Palestinians, and still is there. Under the Shah regime, Iran did not have any relation with Cuba, and I would say the rest of it later, if you allow me.
Yes, that would be great.
All right, thank you very much for...
Yeah, yes, as I said earlier, sorry for cutting off speakers, but we will have a question and answer session.
Yeah, definitely.
Where we are not going to put such strict time limits, but let's hear everyone first. So our next speaker, who should have been our first one, is Ali Abutalebi. Ali was born in Tehran in Iran in 1977 and graduated in engineering administration from Payam-e-Noor University. He's executive director of Mazmoon Books since 2005, and he is the publisher, among others, of Who Killed Che by Michael Ratner and Michael Stephen Smith, and US-Cuba Relations by Arnold August. He has lived in the United States since 2017, and he's a founder of Iranian Campaign for Solidarity with Cuba, collaborator with the Urban Economy Forum as an independent researcher, and author of several articles for the Iranian press and political websites, focused mainly on Latin American progressive movements. He recently published a book on Cuba called Rest in Peace, Ernesto. So Ali will speak for about 5 minutes. Ali, please go ahead.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, it's an honor to be speaking to you today. I appreciate the organizers and coordinators giving me this opportunity. First, I would like to congratulate the 43rd anniversary of the Islamic Revolution. 43 years ago, one of the most important political and military bases of US imperialism, the Shah's regime, was defeated by the Iranian people, and we could take a great leap forward. After hundreds of years of foreign interference, The Islamic Revolution brought back national sovereignty, and that's why I support this revolution. For decades, imperialism suppressed any progressive movement in Iran, and as a looting machine, imposed neo-colonial relations to the Iranian society. But the 1979 revolution put an end to the life of a puppet regime. The Islamic Revolution is a decisive turning point, not only in Iran's history, but in the history of the global South. For example, the history of the Palestinian resistance movement during the recent 4 decades shows this great effect. From this point of view, the Cuban Revolution has been in the same position. Cuban Revolution has played a key role in empowering, establishing, and the victory of progressive movements in the global South. Imagine how an enormous amount of energy was released after the 1966 Tricontinental Conference in Havana. Or consider that the Battle of Cuito Kanawale led the apartheid regime in South Africa to collapse. We could mention many examples and refer to many pieces of evidence that prove both Iran and Cuba have inspired anti-imperialist movements around the world, like 2 beacons for the South. But now, I would like to talk a little about the challenge of creating a coalition against unilateralism and promoting an anti-imperialism front under the leadership of Iran and Cuba. The first challenge is our weaknesses, like mismanagement, mistakes, historical limitations. It's a long list, but we must overcome them to empower ourselves. The second is our negligence. For example, Iran and Cuba have had friendly political relations as allies and formed a successful political cooperation. Look at the UN General Assembly voting records, for example. But on the other hand, there are many potential opportunities for economic, cultural, and scientific cooperation that we did not explore yet. We must develop close ties between Iran and Cuba. Iran and Cuba cooperating during the pandemic for producing the COVID-19 vaccine shows us we can do it if we will, and we can make an actual change if we will. Carrying millions of tons of fuel to Venezuela by Iranian tankers is another example that shows us we can do it if we will. But the third challenge is sabotage. I'm not talking about the propaganda of mainstream media. Those media are receiving the money to do their duty. And I'm not talking about the culture war and its soldiers. I'm talking about those who identify themselves as progressive and revolutionary, but ignorantly are doing as imperialist mercenaries, stressing on ideological, cultural, and historical differences between Iran and Cuba, and denying any possibility of cooperation and coordination, pointing their fingers to the problems without mentioning any practical solution, and mourning instead of organizing. I'm talking about those who don't realize any battle for liberty and independence without fighting against imperialism will be defeated. And I'm talking about those who don't realize fighting against imperialism has no meaning without fighting for liberty and social justice. Determining the borders when you face reactionary forces is not so hard, but you need to be smarter when you face these kind of political remarks. And I and my colleagues, as members of the Iranian Campaign for Solidarity with Cuba, are trying to overcome those challenges, to work side by side to maintain independence, to strengthen friendship, to overcome cruel sanctions. imperialist sanctions and to move forward to the future. Our mission is to enlighten the truth, describe the achievements of the revolution, and explore ways to resolve the problems. Our mission is to talk to youth, the young generation, about the legitimacy of revolution, Iranian revolution and Cuban revolution, potentially and continuously, patiently and continuously. Our mission is showing unity is possible and essential. We believe Iran and Cuba should have more collaboration and cultural exchange, people to people. And from this point of view, publishing the Farsi edition of Arnold August's book has been one of those efforts. To conclude, I would like to invite all audiences to join us, to help us, and mention one of the famous quotes from Commander Ernesto Che Guevara: "Don't trust imperialism, not one iota." It has been my pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ali. That was really great. I would like to request you to put any links that you may want to in the chat so that people may go to your websites and so on and so forth.
I will do.
Great. So thank you. And so our next speaker is Ali Yerevani. Ali is a political editor of the Fire This Time newspaper and the Battle of Ideas Press in Canada. He's been a social justice activist since 1971, while in high school in Iran during the despotic regime of Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi. He was a participant in the 1979 revolution, and since 1984, he has been organizing social justice causes in Europe, the US, and Canada. In Europe, he was the organizer of the Nelson Mandela Defense Campaign. In Canada, he's been a founder of Mobilization Against War and Occupation, Free the Cuban Five Committee Vancouver, the Palestine Solidarity Group, the Vancouver Communities of Solidarity with Cuba, the Iranian Community Against War, the Battle of Ideas Press, the Fire This Time Movement for Social Justice, and the Vancouver Center for Che Guevara Conference, and many other social justice organizations. And he's going to speak for about 15 minutes. So Ali, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It is 6:30 a.m. here in Vancouver, Canada, and I wish a good afternoon and good evening to everyone else. Greetings and solidarity with the heroic Iranian people who for 43 years have tirelessly resisted the fought back against imperialist bullying and savage aggression, especially by the United States. Thank you very much, Radhika, again, for the introduction. And indeed, thank you, Arnold, and the International Manifesto Group for providing this extraordinary platform to talk about 33 years of Islamic revolution in Iran. In addition, it is a great pleasure and honor to be here today in this event with all distinguished speakers. I also would like to ask the participants to bear with me because I'm still recovering from Omicron, so I prefer to read my talk. Sometimes I explain, but mainly I talk, which will I read, which will help me to focus on issues. First, I would like to congratulate Mohammed Borbani for a clean and remarkable translation of Arnold August's book. Mohammed made this book easy to read for Farsi readers and has done an excellent translation from the first page to the last page of the English version. I would like to express my gratitude to Ali Abdul Talibi that this book could be printed. Arnold August's book, Cuba-US Relationship, or in Farsi, Imperialism و Democracy در Cuba, is written specifically on US-Cuba relations. However, It is very valuable for Iranian readers, especially because of the similarities which exist in the United States unjust and oppressive approach to both Cuba and Iran. Cuba and Iran, while one being an Islamic government and the other being a socialist government, have both been punished for exercising their right to self-determination, developing the way they see fit to build their respective countries. Both countries have been under severe sanctions and blockades, in the case of Cuba for more than 60 years, and in the case of Iran for more than 40 years. Yet, both countries have continued resisting and fighting back for their rights, and not only to survive, but Cuba and Iran have successfully and amazingly advanced and progressed in all aspects of technology, industrialization, medical sciences, art, sports, military education, and all other social and economic development. No wonder both countries have deeply influenced their respective regions and have immensely impacted politics in Latin America, the Middle East, Asia, and Africa. Today, both Cuba and Iran are the leading forces of resistance against US meddling and domination. So much so that there is no so much so that there is no political change or motion in Latin America without Cuba as leading factor. And similarly, there is no political movement in the entire Middle East and Africa and most parts of Asia without Iran as the leading factor. Both countries have become the bastion of the anti-imperialist struggle for oppressed nations. Therefore, Farsi readers of this book will find a lot of parallel and a lot to learn from imperialism and democracy در Cuba. I have the Farsi version. I don't know if you can see it. It is very nice, and also the English version. Let me share a memory, a significant memory with you. You might find it interesting. Exactly, I'm saying exactly, and I'm not exaggerating. Precisely 43 years ago today, at this time, between 6 to 8 a.m., after the uprising and heavy fighting the night before, I was standing with two of my friends in the middle of the compound of the Iranian secret police called Savak, the Shah of Iran, vicious and ruthless secret police in a city in north of Iran. Their compound had fallen. The night before, hundreds of newly armed people had fought back and brought down the huge secret police compound. By 6 a.m., the compound surrendered. There I was, standing in the middle of the compound in these moments. Smoke everywhere, two secret police hung off of the lance posts, another dead secret police body killed with many bullets on the ground, and hundreds of people were roaming around the compound to uncover their torture chambers, torture devices, and weapons. Some were taking pictures to document the historic moment. At that very moment, I was happy that the secret police were gone. As the military base on other side of the city collapsed too, I happily understood that the Shah of Iran was gone for good. However, I honestly had no idea what would happen 2 or 5 or 43 years later. And here I am today with extraordinary memories, stories of many struggles from an extraordinary event in history. February 11 and 12 marked the triumph of the 1979 Iranian Revolution. 2 days that shook the world. 2 days that changed the world. Like millions of Iranians, young and old, I was honored to participate in finishing the overdue task of overthrowing the imperialist puppet regime of monarch Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi and cutting imperialist powers from Iran. As a young activist, I observed a tremendous exhibition of discontent, power, and will of millions of heroic Iranian people. The Iranian Revolution was deeply rooted in the history of the Iranian people's struggle for freedom and democracy. The February 1979 revolution, known now as Islamic Revolution, stems from Iran's first anti-colonial movement in 1891 against unjust colonial tobacco contract imposed on Iran by Britain. The tobacco movement was the vanguard of oppressed people anti-colonial movement throughout Asia and Africa. From 1891, this fundamental desire for change never rested, continuing through 1905-1911 revolution, constitutional revolution, the 1920s, 1930s, 1945 to 1953, and finally 1979. For almost a century, the Iranian people were consistently on the march for change. No matter what one calls it, the Iranian Revolution or the Iranian Islamic Revolution, the 1979 revolution was one of the most significant mass popular movement in modern times, demonstrating clear antagonistic classes in motion. Both sides were fighting to prevail by any means necessary on the respective terms. The 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran was a classic revolution, resembling the Great Russian Revolution of 1917 in terms of dynamics of the battle between revolution and counter-revolution of the social classes. After 14 months of unrest and mass protest, both sides finally reached exhaustion. It became clear that one had to remove the other. The mass revolutionary struggle for eliminating the old order led to the mass popular armed insurrection of millions of Iranians against the old, corrupt, isolated, and broken monarchist regime. By the dawn of February 12, 1979, today, in these hours, the will of the mass majority of Iranian people prevailed. History took a deep breath of relief. It is fair to say that every honest person who participated and had the honor and privilege to intervene in this gigantic shakeup of history in Iran would say with utmost certainty and confidence that it was unequivocally the right things to do. Regardless of difficulties, tremendous pressures, danger, violence, physical harm, and death, bringing down the monarch was a historical task that was long, long overdue. The Iranian Revolution changed the whole political equation in the Middle East and North Africa. It has changed for foreseeable future the balance and relationship of social and political forces, not only in the immediate region, the Middle East, but the whole Africa, Asia, the rest of the world. The Iranian Revolution, powerful message for independence and self-determination is still resonating, influencing, motivating, and inspiring millions in the Middle East and North Africa today. It is no wonder that Iran has been under consistent attack by US imperialism to undermine the fundamental achievement of Iranian Revolution of 1979. It means independence and the self-determination. With all its mighty army and savagery, US imperialism is currently in its lowest capacity to dominate oppressed nations. Without any doubt, the United States imperialism is declining. We see this the humiliating defeat of US in Afghanistan and Iraq. From the occupation of Afghanistan in 2001 to the occupation of Iraq in 2003, which started a new era of war and occupation, to revolutionary uprising in the Middle East and North Africa in 2011, and further ongoing heroic resistance by Yemenis, Syrians, and Palestinians in the face of imperialist aggression, we see the proof of the continuing spirit of the Iranian Revolution and its aftershocks for fundamental change. What is known now as the Islamic Revolution of Iran, its revolutionary dynamics and its resistance to imperialism have put working and oppressed people in the Middle East, North Africa, and around the world in a better position to win the struggle against imperialist suppression and domination, to achieve national independence and self-determination. All of this with continued hope to strike forward toward a better world. Today, defending Cuba and Iran against the brutal United States and its imperialist allies is fundamental task of every true progressive and human-loving person and organization. Needless to say, feeling and intentions are essential for humanity, but cannot change the situation. In unity and consistency, we need to build a solid and effective anti-war, anti-occupation, anti-sanctions movement worldwide. In that, we will win. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ali. That was just fantastic. And I think a really panoramic view of the difference Iran has made to the anti-imperialist struggle. And I think also a clear indication of what we need to do going forward. Now, I have a bit of a question. Is our next speaker, Susanna Khalil, here? She's not here. Okay, then we will go to the speaker after that. That is Bahman Azad. Bahman is an Iranian-American peace activist who has been involved in the struggle for peace and justice in the United States and around the world since the 1970s. He's a retired professor of sociology and economics and a representative of the World Peace Council at the United Nations. He's also a member of the Administrative Committee of the United National Anti-War Coalition, or UNAC for short, an organization with which the International Manifesto Group has collaborated before. Bahman was also serving as co-chair of the Venezuelan Embassy Protectors Defense Committee in Washington, D.C. Was the coordinator of the Coalition Against U.S. Foreign Military Bases and the Global Campaign Against U.S. NATO Military Bases. He has also played a role in other organizations, such as being coordinator of the Hands of Syria Coalition, the People's Mobilization. He was the chair of the Iran Working Group of Veterans for Peace. His research area includes the political economy of capitalism and socialism, something that is very close to the Manifesto Group. So again, lots to collaborate on, Bahman. And his articles on the subject have appeared in such journals as Pacific Affairs and Nature, Society, and Thought. He is the author of the book Heroic Struggle, Bitter Defeat, Factors Contributing to the Dismantling of the Socialist State in the USSR, which was published by International Publishers, New York. So Bahman will speak for about 15 minutes. So Bahman, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Radhika. And thank you to Arnold for allowing me to be part of this very distinguished panel celebrating the 1979 revolution in Iran. I just want to say about the book that Arnold wrote and Mohammed had translated, that I eagerly read the Persian copy, Farsi copy of it as soon as I received it. And I congratulate Arnold for the content and Mohammed for the excellent translation of the book. It is really an invaluable asset for the movement. Today, I'm going to briefly talk about what brings revolutionary Cuba and Iran, two completely different social, political, and economic systems together. What interests do they have in common? Let me start by referring to the characterization of the Iranian Revolution as Islamic Revolution. I will not get into the ups and downs of what happened in the past 43 years and focus only on the aspects of the Iranian Revolution that Iran and Cuba have in common. It is true that the 1979 revolution happened under the leadership of Ayatollah Khomeini and Islamic forces under the banner of Islam. But it would be inaccurate to characterize it merely as an Islamic revolution. I am not saying that it was not, but it was more than that. It was an anti-imperialist popular revolution led by Islamic ideology. In a sense, it was Islamic in form, anti-imperialist in essence. Allow me to explain what I'm saying. The popular demands throughout the revolutionary process were independence, freedom, and social justice, not just implementation of Islam. For the Islamic leadership, which replaced the term Islamic Republic with replaced it for the social justice as a third demand of the revolution, the two terms were interchangeable. The participation of the revolution went far beyond the Islamic forces. It included the nationalists, the left, and the communists. The working class, especially the oil workers, played a key role in bringing down the Shah's dictatorship. In other words, all strata of society, and not just the Islamic forces, supported Ayatollah Khomeini, his anti-imperialist policy, and his leadership. What made Ayatollah Khomeini the undisputed leader of the revolution when the US tried to stop the revolutionary process halfway by arranging the Shah's departure, creating a royal council chaired by the Shah's wife, Farah, and appointed Shahpur Bakhtiyar as prime minister. It was agreed among them that Bakhtiyar would dissolve Shah's brutal secret service, Savak, as he did, in order to quell the wrath of the people and stop the revolutionary process. The imperialist plan created much confusion among the revolutionary masses, as it led to the Shah's departure and satisfied one of the main demands of the people by dissolving Savak. It was at that stage that Ayatollah Khomeini elevated the popular demand of the Shah Moscow to monarchy Moscow and called for the removal of Bakhtiyar and his government. He rejected the idea of establishment of an Islamic state proposed by many in religious establishment and called for the formation of a republic guided by principles of revolutionary Islam. The Revolutionary Council formed after the defeat of the US plans and removal of Bakhtiyar transformed the Iranian society in ways that did not necessarily follow the traditional Islamic principles. One example is the concept of private property, which is sacred in traditional Islam. The Revolutionary Council appointed by Ayatollah Khomeini confiscated the properties of the previous ruling class, nationalized major industries, including banks, insurance, foreign trade, and turned over the Israeli embassy to the PLO, named the street in front of the British embassy Bobby Sands Streets. The political system was changed from a monarchy into an Islamic, not into an Islamic state, but into a republic, something that had no precedence in Islamic tradition. It expelled 60,000 US military advisors and removed Iran from CENTO military pact with the US and joined the non-aligned movement. Ayatollah Khomeini declared that the workers not just Islamic forces, are the backbone of the revolution, and it stated that the title of the land belongs to the hands of the people who work on it. Based on his pronouncements, the revolutionary government started a broad land reform, which unfortunately was halted as a result of the US instigated and supported 8-year war with Iraq. All these transformations went far beyond what was accepted by traditional Islamic establishment, as was opposed and still is being opposed by conservative Islamic forces within society and the government. Ayatollah Khomeini, in fact, and his supporters of his line had to fight an uphill battle against these conservative forces. The struggle is still going on within the Iranian society and the leadership of the Islamic Republic of Iran. For more than 2 decades, the more conservative and pro-West wing of the leadership of Iran managed to get the upper hand and tried to move Iran toward a neoliberal system of privatization and economic restructuring demanded by the IMF and the World Bank. They reduced the concept of neither East nor West as adopted at the beginning of the revolution into just Northeast slogan, and increasingly moved toward reconciliation with the West. But those of us who supported the revolution from the very beginning and continue to do so now are today very happy to see that the more radical wing of the leadership has now taken charge and is moving Iran closer to the East, where it in fact belonged from the very beginning. So if we just focus on the Iranian revolution's Islamic ideology and not on the broader anti-imperialist popular character, we will fail to see the objective facts that bring socialist Cuba, led by the Communist Party of Cuba, and the Islamic Iran together. It is not their ideology that brings these two states together, but the fact that both revolutions in Cuba and Iran disrupted the imperialist order of domination in their respective regions, and now jointly, along with dozens of other countries that are resisting imperialist aggression, including economic sanctions, military interventions, and violations of their sovereignty, are fighting for their independence and their right to self-determination. It is this objective fact that links the fate of the Cuban and Iranian revolutions together. Let me give you only one example of how the leaders of the Iranian revolution saw the similarities between the Cuban revolution and the Islamic revolution. Shortly after the victory of Iranian revolution, the then Cuban ambassador, first one, to the Islamic Republic, met with Ayatollah Talabani, one of the most progressive leaders of the Iranian revolution. After that meeting, Ayatollah Talabani publicly said, as Mr. Ambassador describes it, the Cuban revolution is also an Islamic revolution. Similarly, when Fidel traveled to Iran in May 2001 for the first time after the revolution, the then Iranian President Khatami welcomed him by saying, our nation has great affection for the people of Cuba, and Mr. Castro's presence today comes after 22 years of waiting. In response, Fidel said, Iran is an epic country of revolution, culture, and civilization. I feel at home here. He praised Iran as a pioneer on the road to independence and liberty, and for its anti-imperialist struggle since 1979. I'm not here again. I will want to emphasize that I'm not trying to reduce the role of Islam in the success of the Iranian revolution, but I want to point to the elements that linked Iranian and Cuban revolutions at their core. Radhika, if I have a couple of more minutes, I would like to share a memory that I have from the hostage-taking situation.
Absolutely, you do. Please go ahead. You have about 4 minutes, according to
Oh, great, thanks.
Yeah.
I want to go back to this example of a memory that happened to me, actually. It was in a kind of interesting. At the time of the embassy takeover, I don't call it hostage taking because nobody took hostages. I was working on my PhD dissertation in Southern Illinois. Our campus was full of Iranians and Arabs and other foreign students. We had 900 Iranians on that campus. I was very well known from the beginning, first during the Shah, against the Shah's struggle, and as a staunch supporter of Iranian revolution, well known in the community. The day that the embassy takeover took place, it was interesting that the day after, because Iran is ahead of us in terms of time in the US, the Iranian Student Islamic Association on campus, which was really all of them were followers of Ayatollah Khomeini then and his line, and had very close relationship with us as socialists and communists. They called for a demonstration in front of a student center in defense of the embassy takeover. You can imagine what would happen as a result of that. There was, uproar among the population, in the students, all over. How can you support this and all that? And things got really tense. And the Iranians were being attacked all over the place, in restaurants, in bars, on the streets and all that. It got to a point where Palestinians, who were the main targets at the time of the wrath of the reaction in the United States, had to say, I'm a Palestinian, not Iranian, to save themselves at that time. So the following day, the university's vice president for student affairs called me to his office and said, your life is in danger, you have to leave the city. And don't drive. Take a bus and leave the city for a while. So I did. I got a ticket for a bus to Chicago to some of my friends and comrades, and sat in the bus. As it was leaving, somebody, an American with a kind of a bulky person, a very strong man, sat next to me. The bus took off, and after a while, he started talking to me, chatting and all that. We had 8 hours of drive. He said, where are you from? I was stuck. I didn't know what to say. I said, I'm from Turkey. Suddenly he started speaking Turkish to me. I was surprised. I didn't know what to say. I said, sorry, I was raised in the United States. I do not understand Turkish. How do you know Turkish? He said, well, I am a member of US Army stationed in NATO base in Ankara, in Turkey. That's how I know Turkish. So I got away with it, but it was close. So I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you very much for giving me the time.
Thank you very much, Baman. I must say, I feel like I have gained new insights into the complex processes that constituted the Iranian Revolution. So thank you very much. Our next speaker is Abdul Hamid Shahrabi. Hamid he's educated in political science and business administration and has been engaged in political activities for a very long time. From 1970 to 79, he was a political activist in exile in the United States, fighting against the Shah's repressive regime. During this period, he contributed as a writer to Students' Message, a weekly magazine in Farsi. In the same period, he also acted as an organizer of the Committee for Artistic and Intellectual Freedom in Iran, CAIFI for short. CAIFI launched a broad and successful campaign in defense of the Shah's political prisoners, involving reputable figures in the US anti-war movement and resulting in the freedom for a number of those detained. From 84 to 90, he was manager of Solidarity publications, having published, for example, Fidel Speaks and Fidel and Religion, Venezuelan Revolution, Dialogue of Marta Harnecker with Hugo Chavez, and Nicaraguan Revolution, Sandinistas Speak. From 2007 up to now, he has been co-founder and research director of at the House of Latin America, or HOLA, based in Iran. HOLA has been involved in activities aimed at deepening solidarity between the peoples of Latin America and Iran, and it has been focused on promoting the achievements of liberation movements in the countries of ALBA. In 2021, he received the Cuban Friendship Medal, awarded by the Cuban Council of State. So we're very lucky to have Hamid here, so the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. The advantage of speaking late at a panel is that you hear what the other speakers say, and that gives you the chance to prevent repetition. And what I'm going to promise is that I'm going to talk much shorter than the time given to me, to give the time to more time for the question and answers. What Bahman spoke, his exposition on the dynamic of the Iranian Revolution and the peculiarities of Iranian Revolution relieves me from stating the same. I just endorse what he said fully. Very fine presentation explaining the dynamic of the Islamic Revolution. What really is common between Iran and Cuba, as mentioned by other speakers, is that they stood up against imperialist domination. They did that, and not only that, after the victory, they stood against the continuous aggressions of the United States imperialism and its allies, the European allies. And again, not only that, in this resistance, they became the source of inspiration and encouragement for other liberation movements throughout their respective region, Cuba in Latin America and Iran in the Middle East and North Africa. With the Iranian Revolution, what really happened was, I would rather to quote the supreme leader of Iranian Revolution as saying that the era that the United States used to hit and run has ended. That period has ended. Now, if you hit, you will be hit back. You cannot bump and run, as we saw the example after the terror of the Shahid Qasem Soleimani. The whole world witnessed the response of Iran by hitting back the US military base in Iraq. So we are talking about two very genuine, popular, deeply popular revolutions that have been successful in resisting the US imperialism and have been able to achieve success, to gain. We have lots of precious achievements, both in Cuban. I'm not going to compare and go to details, but what we have gained, the workers in Iran, the peasants in Iran in the era of Shah were second-hand citizens. They wouldn't count. They were completely suppressed. Now the things have changed. Iranian workers, I'm not saying that they're in a very desirable situation. That's another issue that we can go to it in another discussion, but the whole thing has changed. Let me give keep up with my promise and be brief. The second point I want to just highlight is what is the stand of the United States in regard to Cuba and Iran. Bahman mentioned it. Mohammed mentioned it. All these aggressions, attempts for coup d'etat, killing thousands of innocent people through terrorist acts, attempts for direct military interventions, both in Cuba and Iran. And now the most severe and the harsh weapon which is acting like just like a military war, killing the people, the economic sanctions. We just say economic sanctions, but it would be very proper to go and deal with this and come up with a better understanding that how these sanctions are affecting the life of millions of the people, especially the oppressed people in these countries, the poor people in the sanctioned countries. Let me tell you this. When the Iranian students occupied the United States Embassy in Iran, as they called it, the spy net, one of the documents that was unraveled at that time was this. This was an instruction given by Washington to the Embassy of the United States in Iran. The instruction was given at the time that someone, a high delegates from Cuba and Iran were going to meet. And the instruction says that watch out this relationship. This is the word, this is the catchword. They do appreciate the what is the meaning of the unity of Iran and Cuba and what comes out of it if this unity becomes strengthened. The last thing which I want just to make a few words about it is that facing the imperialist aggressions against Cuba and Iran, what would be our task? What are the governments are doing, the people are resisting, but we in this panel who are talking and discussing about the ways to confront this aggression, what is in our agenda? I think, to put it simply, is one-point agenda: to organize the broadest movement against sanctions. There are other ways of US aggressions against Iran, but the main axis of their aggression is sanctions. And when we look at this, although we have had valuable contributions among the two countries in regard to biotechnology, in regard to, as Mohammed mentioned, the cooperation in regard to COVID-19 vaccine and vaccination of the masses of the people. But to be truthful, we are far, far behind where we should be. We are far, let me tell you this, the fact, these are the truth. When you look at the numbers, the figures of the economic relationship between Iran and Cuba, you are close to the figure 0. I'm not exaggerating, the figure 0. Negligible cooperation. And there is a vast area for cooperation. Vast area. It was mentioned, Iran has oil, Cuba needs oil. What keeps us from delivering oil to Cuba? I tell you what keeps us from that. Interventions, influences, the right-wing capitalist, imperialist pressures to prevent such a close cooperation in terms of figures. Just look at this. Cuba has medicines that I call them the miracle medicines for lung cancer. Not only to vaccinate those susceptible to lung cancer, but also to cure those with the not very progressive stage of lung cancer. It cures that. It's proven. The medical institution of the United States, they admit this fact. It's not a claim by the Cuban government. Also, you name it, for Alzheimer, for diabetic diseases, they have these miracle medicines. I'm just mentioning one area, one specific area, that we don't have it in Iran. Why we don't have it? Is it only my knowledge that I know this? No. It's people in the government also know this. It should be demanded. This type of things should be demanded. Broader cooperation, not only between Iran and Cuba, but also among all the sanctioned countries, with the indispensable help of China. This would be the road. this would be the concrete path that we could strengthen our forces in order to battle and confront the main axis of the US aggressions at the moment, which is the economic sanctions. I should have said this at the beginning of the talk. I sincerely appreciate the work of Arnold August for writing this book, which is a vehicle, a tool to know, to become more educated about how the United States intervenes in the life of an independent country and how to confront that and to battle that. Also, I thank Ali Abu Talebi as the publisher of the book, a great job, like his other works in regard to translation of other valuable works, and also Mohammad Qurbani for his great contribution. Thank you for giving me the time.
Thank you very much, Hamid. Arnold, once again, I need to ask you whether Saide Khadir is here.
No.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm trying desperately to call her. There must be some kind of
Okay. Well, if she shows up, please send me an email or say send me a message. But otherwise, we'll go to the next speaker. And our next speaker was unfortunately called away to Caracas. So he has sent us a brief video. So our speaker is Tim Anderson, who has degrees in economics and international relations and a doctorate in the political economy of liberalization from Australia. He has taught at Australian universities for more than 30 years. His most recent books are Land and Livelihoods in Papua New Guinea, The Dirty War on Syria, which has appeared in 10 languages, and Axis of Resistance Towards an Independent Middle East. I'm sure many of you know of his work already. He has been published in a range of academic journals, including Health and Human Rights, the Pan American Health Journal, the International Journal of Cuban Studies, the Australian Journal of Human Rights, Latin American Perspectives, the Journal of Iberian and Latin American Studies, the Portuguese Studies Review, Current Issues in Criminal Justice, the Australian Journal of Professional and Applied Ethics, Critical Public Health, the Journal of Australian Political Economy, and Pacific Economic Bulletin. Tim is also a consultant to the United Nations Development Programme on South-South cooperation and development strategy and has written extensively on Cuban medical cooperation in Timor-Leste in the Southwest Pacific. In 2017, he was awarded the Cuban Friendship Medal granted by the Cuban Council of State on the proposal of the Cuban Institute for Friendship with the Peoples. So Paul will now play the video that we have of Tim. While Paul is figuring that out, let me also just read to you a brief message that Tim has sent in addition to the video. So the message says the following. Congratulations to Arnold for his sustained and skillful efforts to generate understandings of Cuba and for his current linking of Latin American anti-imperialism with the resistance in West Asia. The role of Iran in leading the resistance of independent peoples of its region deserves better understanding. Here in Venezuela, this remarkable transcontinental solidarity is having a real impact. So that's Tim's brief written message, and hopefully, Paul, we can now play the video.
Up until the time that Arnold August published his book on democracy in Cuba, there were very few sources in the English language that you could read to understand exactly what was going on in the Cuban's political system. So therefore in the US, they would just say, oh, there's a dictatorship, there's no elections, nothing happens like that. And most people wouldn't know any better. But Arnold made a very important contribution. I think the major book before Arnold's was by Ricardo Alarcon, talking about the political system in Cuba. And since that time, Arnold, of course, has published a large number of publications on Cuba, specializing in Cuba, looking at the blockade over the years, looking at the various psychological operations used against Cuba, looking at the change in regimes in the US and what that meant. There's a lot of history that's involved in that relationship between the US and Cuba. So it's very important that we've got Arnold as a specialist interpreter, one of the most prolific writers in the English language on Cuban political system. And I'm very pleased to see that now he has been globalizing his approach to things, getting this book published in Farsi and therefore into West Asia, and linking up also to struggles, resistance struggles in Lebanon, in Syria, in Palestine, across that region. Because I think it's very important, because just as imperialism has globalized its reach and trying to hang on desperately to its last the dying gasps of its reach across the world, so the resistance has to globalise across the world. So it's very pleasing to see Arnold's book published in Farsi, and best wishes to the event today.
So now let me go to our final speaker, who is Arnold, none other than Arnold August himself. I will just give a brief introduction, and then Arnold will speak for about 5 minutes, and then we will go to questions and answers, the moment that I know a lot of members of the audience have been waiting for. So Arnold is a Montreal-based author and journalist who has an MA in political science from McGill. He has published 3 books on Cuba. The groundbreaking democracy in Cuba and the 1997-98 elections. The second is Cuba and its neighbors, democracy in motion, about which Fernando González, Lord of the Cuban Five and president of ICAP, writes, "The chapter on democracy in the US is among the best critical analyses I have read. There are elements of the democratic functioning of Cuban society that even I myself had not noticed." Finally, he wrote Cuba-US Relations, which, according to Dan Kovalik, or rather about which Dan Kovalik said, August is one of the foremost experts on Cuba and the 1959 revolution. Arnold is also a journalist and has published in English, Spanish, and French in North and South America, Europe, the Middle East, and India. In 2013, he won an award from the Cuban Union of Journalists. And in 2017, he was awarded the Cuban Friendship Medal by the Cuban State Council on the recommendation of ICAP. He also collaborates with Telesur, Cuban Television, and Press TV Iran. So Arnold, please go ahead.
Thank you, Radhika. First, I'd like to thank all of the people, Iranian and non-Iranians, who collaborate in putting this panel together. And I would have to say, like Radhika, I have learned so much just in this short period of exchanging with you on this panel, and going back some time when the translation of the book began into Farsi, dealing with the translators, the book publishers, and also with regards to the book launch in Tehran, getting to know from the inside what the Iranian Revolution or Islamic Revolution is all about. Now, myself and many other commentators, we are asserting that currently the world is going through a major world geopolitical reconfiguration. This is an important assertion, and I'd like to try to explain in 3-4 minutes what we mean by that, and it is the following. Firstly, in order to grasp that, we have to go out of the Iranian-Cuban exchange or situation, relationship, as we have been dealing up till now. And let us go further. For example, Iran and Venezuela. Iran has a special type of oil. It is very light, and it's used to blend sort of to dilute the very heavy oil that Venezuela produces, and to a large extent not valuable for exporting to other countries. So back in May 2020, Iran and Venezuela, both countries highly sanctioned by the United States, began the program of shipping through oil tankers on the high seas the Venezuelan light to be used by the Iranian light to be used by the Venezuelan oil industry in order to produce the oil that is good for exporting, for example, to Iran. So it is definitely a swap. But I'd like to bring to your attention, this was a major anti-imperialist action that started in May 2020 with these tankers going to Venezuela, as well as right up to date. And I don't know if anyone saw that footage from Telesur TV. It was quite inspiring. As these tankers were heading towards Venezuelan ports, they were escorted into those ports with the Venezuelan air and naval forces. So, you know, when the reaction of the Venezuelan government, specifically President Maduro, he said this Iranian-Venezuelan is an alliance, a revolutionary anti-imperialist alliance. Yes, it definitely is. Now, this type of exportation or exchange between the two countries has been going on since May 2020. Around a dozen ships went from Iran to Venezuela. Now, by January 2022, recently, Venezuela was able to announce that the production of their oil has doubled, despite the sanctions against Venezuela. This has major repercussions on the international scale. For example, what about Cuba? As a result of this, Cuba, who has suffered from these sanctions, which prohibited Venezuela from producing its oil and sending it to Cuba, since January 2022, my sources in Havana tell me that the exports of Venezuelan oil to Cuba has picked up drastically, and this is helping the very dire situation that Cuba is facing as a result of the Trump-Biden sanctions, as well as the pandemic and all that. So this is a very important point. And let us go a bit further in terms of other countries. We have the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, the Belt and Road Initiative, based on China, has since, in a recent period, incorporated Iran in this Belt and Road International Initiative based on China. Recently, Cuba has also joined. And very interestingly, just about a week ago, the Argentinian president traveled to Beijing in order to attend the Olympics there, despite all the pressures, I guess. And he met with President Xi of China. And what did they do? They signed a new pact of collaboration based on the Belt and Road Initiative. So this is, I think, and there's also, this is quite widespread. I read a recent article by our colleague, Carlos Martinez, in China, Socialist China. I will be putting in the chat later on, in which he points out something I didn't know and is not that well known, that since several years, since 2013, 21 of 33 countries in Latin America are involved in one way or another in this Belt and Road Initiative based in China. And then, let's go a bit further. There has been, Russia has carried out military exercises, joint military exercises with Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. And there's also in the South China Sea, other collaboration between Iran, China, and Cuba as well. So I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that there's a major change coming up. It's not just major in terms of geographically, that is Asia, West Asia, and Latin America. That is the case, of course. But what is significant is the speed in which these new relations are taking place. Like just between January 2022 till date, many of the things that I described are actually taking place now at this time. And so I think that it's important to underline the importance of Iran, Cuba, and I'd also like to take the time to underline the importance of Socialist China, which is playing a very important role in assisting this international movement by Iran, Venezuela, and Cuba to oppose the hegemony of the US and put forward a pluriparty world against U.S. hegemony. Thank you very much.
That was fantastic, Arnold. Thank you very much. And thank you again for organizing this amazing event where we have, I'm sure, lots of questions coming up. So the way we will handle the question and answer session is as follows. I will invite everybody who has a question to please put their hand up, using the raise hand function, which you will find at the bottom of your screen, either as a separate function which says clearly raise hand, or under reactions. So if you click on reactions, you will find the raise hand function. And what we'll do is, depending on how many questions there are, I will take either one at a time or several at a time. And then after each set of questions, I will go to the panel and I will ask any of the panelists who would like to respond to respond. I will ask the people who are posing the questions to keep their questions brief. And then I will also ask, obviously, the people who are responding to at least be as brief as possible. Of course, we want to hear from you, and so we are not going to restrict you too much, but brief and to the point would also be great, because then we can accommodate more questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the first 3 questions, then go to the panel, and then take another set of questions. So I have the first 3, I have our Fernando, Fez, and Avram Rosner. So Fernando, please go ahead.
Very quick, what is the name of the book translated into Farsi?
Oh, Cuba-US Relations.
Thank you.
Arnold August. Okay, well, in that case, we'll take Charles as well. So Fez, Avram, and Charles. Fez, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you very much to the International Manifesto Group for putting this on. This is so informative. I had the great pleasure to visit Venezuela in 2006 during the World Social Forum in January of 2006. And I was a university student then. And one of the things that I noticed right in the main pavilion at the time was the display of Iranian-made tractors, Iranian-made motorcycles. And I believe, and I remember taking lots of photos of them, and it was, I don't think they were digital, I think they were on film. But I remember learning that those tractors in particular, and these were like large industrial sized tractors, were built in Iran and shipped to Venezuela so that Venezuela could use them in their domestic food production initiatives that they were creating through ALBA. And I know we're talking about the most immediate pressures facing Cuba and Iran today, which are the sanctions that have not been seen in something like 50, 60 years. But I just want to ask the panelists if they could comment on what was the role of Iran in ALBA? Did Iran plug into ALBA to provide those types of industrial services and recoup those types of industrial services from ALBA? And I mean, knowing ALBA is in a weakened state, but is that a model that that Iran has learned from and whatnot? So if you could just comment on that, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fez. Avram, please go ahead.
Thank you, Radhika. Arnie, I'm so proud of you still, 53 years after we met. You get better all the time and you've made a great contribution. Sorry I had to say that. My question is brief. I bother everyone with this. I want to send your Farsi edition as a gift to a friend who was the retired chair of English at Trent University. He's now become a Farsi scholar. I can't figure out how to do it. I don't speak Farsi. So anyone who can answer that, doesn't have to be right now, don't want to waste time, but leave me a link or leave me some information. Thank you very much and congratulations. This is a wonderful event.
I think that's a job for the publisher. Where are you, Ali? Please make sure that Avram knows exactly how to get hold of the Farsi edition. Okay, Charles, please go ahead with your question.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to participate. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay, thank you. I wanted to say, first of all, as others have expressed, that I really very much appreciated the excellent presentations, and it greatly increased my understanding of the Iranian Revolution. And I also would like to note that I have admired for many years the work of Arnold in relation to his constant explanations of Cuba. I would like to make a brief comment having to do with socialist and Islamic ideologies. Often we think that they're different, and of course, in many ways they are. But I would like to suggest that there are important similarities and overlap between the Islamic and socialist ideologies. I think that socialism has historic roots in the great Western religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And that also those three great religious traditions had important components of commitment to social justice that became compromised as those religions became connected to political establishments. The possibility of cooperation between Islam and other religious traditions and the political establishment is actually demonstrated by the Iranian Islamic revolution itself. So that was a comment that I wanted to make. I also wanted to say, just very briefly, that from my vantage point in Cuba, it seems to me that some very small steps, concrete steps, are being taken in terms of Iranian and Cuban cooperation in medicine, as well as Iranian delivery of oil. I agree that all of that should be much more developed, but it is beginning. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Okay, I think those two are substantial questions. So we will now go to the panelists, and then I will come back to Morsiza, and then I also have a couple of questions. So who among the panelists would like to address these first two questions?
Can you just repeat them rapidly?
Charles, can you please quickly repeat your question? We can't hear you.
Yes. Yes, I basically was making the comment that it seemed to me that there was considerable overlap between Islamic and socialist ideologies in that the socialism has historic roots in the great religious traditions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and Islamic ideology has a strong component of social justice that is very much implemented in the Iranian Revolution, as I've learned today. That there's a great deal of overlap between those two ideologies that I think really it makes sense to think of religious traditions in their progressive manifestations and socialism as really being natural ideological as well as political ideologies standing against capitalism.
Great, that's great. So Fez, can I request you to very briefly state your question?
Yeah, very briefly. Where was Iran during the peak of Alba in the mid-2000s?
Okay, so he wants to know more about Alba-Iran relations and generally Iran-Latin America relations. So which among the
I can deal with that.
Panelists would like to respond? Yes, go ahead.
I can. Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It provides me with the opportunity to inform everyone about the following, that over a year ago, Alba and Iran reached an agreement that Iran will be increasingly collaborating with Alba. This is a very important point. I think I might add to that is when CELAC meeting took place in Mexico a short time ago, CELAC includes all of the countries in the hemisphere, except Canada and the United States. Great. Now, at that meeting, select meeting of heads of state organized by Mexico, there was a direct message from China by President Xi, transmitted to the meeting, was quite inspiring, with appropriate subtitles in English and Spanish, in which he expressed the determination of China to develop even further its relationship with CELAC. So you have Iran working with, increasingly working with the ALBA, and also China working with CELAC as well as with ALBA. So this is a very, another aspect of the major, in my view, geopolitical changes that are taking place throughout the world.
I can address the second question.
That would be great, Bahman. I was about to say we should hear from the Iranians who are based in Iran or from Iran as well, but on both questions. So please go ahead, Bahman.
Thanks. On the question of Islam and socialism, I'm not an expert, of course, on Islam, but as much as I know, there are quite a number of things that we have to consider. One is, which Islam are we talking? Because we have the Islam of Saudi Arabia and we have the Islam of Iran, right? Gaddafi's Islam was also its own brand. So we have to classify these categories and see which Islam we are trying to compare to socialism. The second difference that I think we have to consider is the difference between Sunnism and Shiism. Because Shia Islam was actually initiated as a resistance movement. And it has been keeping that tradition for a long, long time, historically. Iranian Islam is based on that. And what distinguishes Shiism from Sunnism is that Sunni tradition in Islam relies on the scriptures, especially the Quran, and everything goes by the book. For Shiism, there is a possibility of adapting the interpretation of the scriptures to the conditions of the time. That is why we have so many Ayatollahs interpreting the situations differently. And it's in that sense a democratic setup. It's not one pope telling everybody what to do or what to say, but you have followers of this Ayatollah who has this interpretation, followers of that Ayatollah having that interpretation. It was Ayatollah Khomeini's interpretation that became the dominant interpretation in Islam of Iran during the revolution. And when we talk about a comparison, then you have to compare what the Iranian Revolution did and at what level it is similar to moving towards socialism, and what Saudi Arabia does, for example, in terms of the setting of the social system. I think it's a question of research, and I think you have to follow that. Thank you.
Thank you, Bahman. Any of the other panelists would like to address? Yes, Hamid, please go ahead.
Very shortly, I would like, I think the question raised by our colleague Charles is a very, very important topic that he brought up. Actually, it may deserve a panel, a full discussion on this topic. But just as a very short comment, I would like to refer to the book that we published years ago at the early years of the Iranian Revolution, Fidel and Religion. This is exactly the same issue that he's talking about, that what religion are we talking about? Religion at the hands of the oppressed, or the interpretation of the capitalists about this issue of religion, or religion as a vehicle, as a tool on the hands of the oppressed to struggle against oppression. The Iranian Revolution, in reality, not theory, proved, in fact, in the streets, in the cities, in the villages, that religion can be utilized, can be at the service of the oppressed to fight against oppression. This was proven. This was a clear message and lessons of the Iranian Revolution. What Fidel talks, I think it's very important for the socialists, those who consider themselves socialist Marxists, to go ahead and once again look at what is the message of this great leader of the socialist movement at our epoch, that how does he identify with the religious movement, with the liberation theology? We have that in the Christianity, as was mentioned in other religions. To put it in a more simple term, it's very important, the issue of unity between the socialist activists, between the communists, and those who believe in religion, but in the way of looking to the religion as a way to struggle, is very important. We have long way to go and to further strengthen this unity. I remember when there was this delegation at the beginning of the revolution of Iran. They went to Havana and they met with Fidel. We quoted that in our books, and we published that Fidel says that this view that you have about Islam, which is fighting against oppression, bring that out to the attention of the whole world. Everybody should know that, how you view, and he identifies with such a view. As Bahman mentioned, it depends that what kind of a religion we are talking about, but there is a great potential among the Islamic activists to be further more united with the socialists, and like vice versa.
Thank you, Hamid. Any other of the panelists would like to say something in response to these two questions? I would just, while you're thinking, I would just like to add that, you know, this very important question that Charles has raised also reminds me of a couple of things. And I'm far from a scholar of Islam, but I will contribute 2 points that I think are very relevant here. One is that, you know, those of you who have read Umberto Eco's Name of the Rose will realize that in that book, the central tension is between the interpretation of Christianity, which takes the dominant form in the form of the Dominicans, and the subversive or the insurrectionary form in the form of the Franciscans. So you can have an interpretation about the church and its wealth and how the church deserves it by the Dominicans, and then you can have a discourse about the poverty of Christ and how he stands by the poor people, which is the discourse of those who are fighting for liberation. So this tension exists in every religion. Some of you mentioned the Abrahamic religions, and of course it exists in there, but in every religion. Hinduism is among the most oppressive religions I know, but there has been hundreds and hundreds of centuries worth of resistance to Hinduism in the form of Buddhism, of course, but also more modern forms, which are known as the Bhakti movement, which dominant forces are always trying to reincorporate. So I completely agree that with Hamid, that one must pay attention to these elements, because otherwise the struggle for socialism will never manage to relate to the vast masses of people. And I think this is very important, that one has to relate to the liberatory traditions in every religion, liberation theology, etc. Okay, are there any other panelists who would like to speak to this? Going once, going twice. All right, second round of questions. I have Murtaza and Abdul, and then I will wait for my question. Maybe it will get asked anyway. So Murtaza, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, first to the moderator, and of course to the work of Arnold and all those who helped to bring about this book. I believe it's essential for anyone who follows the Iranian Revolution to read that book. You are celebrating the Iranian Revolution. There is no doubt about that. The achievements of the Iranian Revolution, I could give you anecdotes, a lot of them, like my niece with 2 kids, you know, with her scarf on, going to play soccer, or being a referee on the national scale, you know. Or I remember very early years of the revolution, where my older sister with so many kids was leaving on a Friday to go for Friday political and prayer gatherings, which was very much like a place where you discuss politics. And when the husband asked her, who is going to cook? He said, well, every day I cook. Now, today is the day when you guys gonna cook, but I have to go to my Friday prayers. So was mentioned as well. The name of a street, Winston Churchill, changed to Bobby Sands. If this only 3 examples give me joy and happiness to celebrate the Iranian Revolution, I'll do that. However, when it comes to Cuba and Iran, that's why the book and the books like Arnold's are so important. The approach of the Cuban revolutionary leadership to the problems that they face. When you read Arnold's book, you understand that for every attack that is happening against the Cuban revolution, the more mobilizations, the more mass gatherings, the more mass educational programs happen, discuss the issues in order to fight back. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen in Iran. Mr. Sharabi mentioned the influence of the imperialists and the capitalist class in Iran. But I really would like the panelists to elaborate more on that. Of course, Iran is resisting invasion, occupation, attacks by the imperialists. But it's like somebody's fighting and you keep receiving blows and blows one after another. And when you compare it to Cuba, Cuba receives a blow, but then they go back, they, mobilize themselves, coming to give a punch. You know what I'm saying? So I wanted the panelists to really elaborate on that because it's essential. There is a capitalist class in Iran, and there is no capitalist class in Cuba. That's why it's not easy to fight the imperialists with your hands tied behind your back, even though we know millions and millions in Iran, especially among the militant Muslims, are in solidarity with the Cuban Revolution, Bolivarian Revolution, and so on. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So what was your question again?
The question is the difference between the way the Iranian Revolution and the Cuban revolutions are defending themselves against the imperialist attacks.
That's great. Thank you. Now, I have to make a big apology as chair. I was supposed to ask Camilla Escalante to ask the first question. So I would like to go to her next, and then we will go to the next person. So Camilla, please go ahead. And I'm very sorry about that. I knew I should have done it, but then I forgot.
It's okay. Thank you so much, Arnold, for your work in documenting Cuba's revolutionary process for the English-speaking world and beyond. And of course, thank you, Radhika, for hosting and moderating another great event. Thank you to the panelists for your work in furthering our understanding of Iran as anti-imperialist governments in Latin America seek ways to expand relations in different areas of cooperation. I'm in Bolivia, where our news outlet, Causastra News, is based. We cover not just Bolivia, but other countries of Latin America, which are seeking South-South ties right now, which are so crucial. And I'm also Press TV's Latin America correspondent. This week, Bolivian President Luis Arce sent his greetings to the Iranian president and people on the occasion of the 43rd anniversary of the triumph of the Islamic Revolution, expressing Bolivia's bilateral agenda of technological and cultural exchange based on friendship, which he would like to further with Iran. And we've heard about the importance of Iran-Cuba vaccination cooperation. Iran and Nicaragua are looking to strengthen ties, and of course with Venezuela. We've heard that Iran's participation was absolutely crucial in reinvigorating the oil sector there. And it was a total lifeline to Venezuela, as we heard Arnold say at the end there. We believe that one of the most important questions that the people of Latin America are facing right now is underdevelopment and the challenges that the people of the South face every day related to being blockaded. Our development is blockaded, and the vast inequality due to interference by the US imperialists. Here's my question. What are some of the specific areas of economic cooperation and economic projects that Iran is looking to initiate with countries of Latin America, or what are some of the areas in which there is potential? I think Hamid Shahrabi kind of touched on a little bit of that, about how there isn't enough of that. But my question is to any of the panelists: what are some concrete economic areas which countries like Bolivia or any other country of Latin America can exchange and grow economically to try to bring our countries out of this vast inequality and underdevelopment that we face?
That's great, Camilla. Thank you so much. And I will take one more question and then we will go to the panelists again. So Abdul, please go ahead. Abdul, are you there? Yes.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Comrade Desai and distinguished presenters. I'm very elated to have this occasion to be among learned colleagues. The practice I don't exercise very often. I have a question which fundamentally, that any society like Iran, there are two fundamental contradictions. One is nationalist contradiction against imperialism, the other was class contradiction between socialists, between working class and capitalist class. Like what Comrade Shahrabi pointed out, Iranian revolution, its counterpart is like liberation theology in Latin America. So from that point of view, it's a very genuine anti-imperialist entity, country that has great achievements in terms of progress of science and technology, educational achievement, infrastructure building, and economic development overall. But at the same time, the country is suffering from very devastating economic conditions that, like United States, that about 15% of people live under poverty line. In Iran, almost the same number of people live in poverty, even though if you calculate US population of 330 million people, 15% of that is about 50 million people in the United States live under poverty, which is obviously greater than the number of Iranians who live in poverty in Iran. But setting aside, now my question is, given this two main contradiction, my comrades who spoke, especially Iranian comrades, which of those two contradictions are the fundamental contradiction in Iran? It's a class struggle with something that has been successfully dealt with in Cuba, or the anti-imperialist contradiction. I do realize that this is a bit off the subject matter today, but like I said, I cannot pass this great opportunity to be among learned colleagues. Thank you for taking my question.
Thank you. Okay, so I think we have three fairly overlapping questions about the nature of the struggles, the challenge of development, the creation of alliances to overcome underdevelopment, etc. So which of the panelists would like to go first? I see, Mohammed, you have your hand up, so maybe you should go first. You're muted, Mohammed. Yeah, that's better.
All right, thank you. What I can say very shortly is that during the last 35 years or so, Iran was under the neoliberal ideology, and different governments followed that path. However, during the Ayatollah Khomeini's time, he was genuinely for social justice for the Iranians, and was constantly emphasizing on having taking a road to bring about a better condition for the whole working class and the general, public. And the same position was the position of Ayatollah Khamenei, that is, he was also from the very beginning, I can say, for a look towards an independent policies, like what these days during the last few years, I can say that he was emphasizing on the economic developments and producing inside the country and so on. But the new liberals, and still they had the upper hand, and I can say that they put all their eggs on the basket of the US and the Western countries. But now the situation, I think, is changing with the new government, and hopefully they would go on a path to develop the economy and so on. What I can also add is that Iran, despite the sanctions and the economic blockade, has a lot of potential for development, especially in, to me, Iran is an advanced country in the fields of science and technology. And that is undeniable, because I can mention a few of the sciences that Iran is very advanced in. For example, in the fields of genetic engineering, in nanotechnology, in aerospace, biotechnology, nuclear technology, and of course the defense industry. Iran is an advanced in all of these and much more. But this needs to go for mass production and good relation with other countries and so on, so we can develop itself. I mean, this is a big challenge in front of us. I just leave it like that.
That's great. Thank you so much, Mohammed. I have Bahman next. Please go ahead, Bahman.
Thank you, Radhika. I would like to answer the question in a more abstract, conceptual way regarding the contradictions of fighting against imperialism and also the question of class struggle. This has been the problem that we, at least, and people who think like me in a group that we have been struggling with. A lot of people in Iran, and I'm sure in many other countries, in the name of class struggle, are going against the established order in these countries that are fighting against imperialism. When the Iranian class struggle during the revolution happened, we were dealing with two contradictions that were aligned with each other. One was the struggle to bring down the Shah was also a struggle against imperialism. But here in our case, the class struggle should not go to the level that would cancel out our anti-imperialist struggle. So we have to understand that any class struggle or any struggle for improving the condition of Iranian women, people within Iran should be done within the shell of the anti-imperialist struggle. We cannot overstep that to weaken our struggle against imperialism. So what we are advocating, for example, Iran has a very progressive constitution, although it has problems here and there, but generally it's a very progressive constitution in terms of freedoms, justice, in terms of the economic structure and all that, more advanced than many other countries. So we advocate that we have to protect the system against imperialism while fighting for the implementation of its constitution from within the system. And it should not be done in a way that would weaken the strength of the country against imperialism. That, I think, is the proper approach to fighting. And it's not just an example of Iran. Many countries are facing the same thing, and the problems are actually exported by imperialism into these societies, and they are faced with dealing with it at every day, day-to-day basis, you know. So we have to set the criterion for struggle within that situation, not to go over and kind of nullify our anti-imperialist struggle by putting the demands in such a way that would weaken our country. That's the essence of it.
Thank you, Bahman. And Hamid, please go ahead. You are muted, Hamid.
Bahman said it. He's correct. The general framework. How shall we look at this question? These two contradictions: the imperialism and the class struggle within the society that is struggling against imperialism. I would just add this, just a memory, tell you something maybe a bit laughable. I was traveling in Europe, a journal in Italy. They had an interview with me about Islamic revolution, and they asked question and I answered. When the article was published, at the front pages of this magazine, it was this quotation from me: "The difference between ice cream and revolution." It sounds funny. What does that mean? A political interview was turned to this question. What I meant was that when you go to an ice cream shop, you order that I want a scoop of vanilla, or 2 scoops of vanilla, or 1 scoop of the other flavor. But the revolution doesn't happen like that. You can't order it. You can't order it. I want a socialist revolution. I want this type of revolution. Iranian revolution happened as an Islamic revolution, despite theories. Theories, we can talk about theories. In reality, it happened. So when we look at that, it is very important to appreciate the potentials within this society, within this framework. This is what I want to say. It is very obvious that when you put your hands in the hands of the capitalists, you are weakened. You do not exploit the possibilities to effectively combat imperialism. But that again is not a question of prescription. That we cannot prescribe that. It is true. Both Murtaza and our other colleagues, they raised the question, which is true: corruption, new liberalist policies, all these things weaken the struggle against imperialism. So we should keep this together with the priority and looking at it. The imperialism is the main contradiction, and in fighting against imperialism, we have to watch out to control the capitalists. In my view, to be very short, I don't think Iran, this is not my view, that a socialist system as such shall be advocated or substituted with what we have here. Rather, what we need is to control, just to control these wild capitalist forces that they really are harmful to our struggle. The other question I would like to shortly address as well, our colleague asked what are the areas for cooperation, economic cooperation between Iran and Latin American countries. There are broad areas. There are a variety of fields that this cooperation can be strengthened and developed. One is like, I was recently in Venezuela and talking to our Venezuelan comrades. I was amazed. They were talking about, with no exaggeration, hundreds of thousands of hectares of land, arable lands, which is not cultivated. Great, and this is not only Venezuela, other countries as well in Latin America, they have such a potential. And Iran has means. Is Iran, comparing to many countries in Latin America, we can call Iran as an industrialist country with some technologies in certain fields, as Mohammed mentioned. So these are the areas, the agriculture, the industries, different range of industries, the different field of sciences, and I mentioned one specific area, which is the achievements of Cuba in the field of medicine and health, which can be introduced and further used in Iran as well. And there are, I think I can sum up this with that there is a need for research and coming up with concrete answer to the question that was raised, defining the areas. But there are many possibilities in that regard.
Thank you, Hamid. And finally, we have one more panelist who would like to respond to these questions, and that is Ali Abu Talebi. Ali, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Just two short points. First, one of audiences asked about availability of Farsi edition in outside of Iran. Unfortunately, because of the sanctions, banking sanctions, especially, the Farsi edition is not available outside of Iran. But we are working on it to provide some copies. But dear audiences can be keep in touch with me. My email address is ali@mazmoon.com. ali@mazmoon.com, and we can keep in touch. The second one, as an engineer, I would like mention Iran, my lovely homeland, has very, very potentially and actually opportunities for cooperation with progressive countries in Latin America, and especially Iran has very well-educated engineering community, and we can have cooperation in construction industry, energy, oil industry, and something like that. And I would like to mention it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ali. Okay, so we will now take the second, perhaps a final round of questions, because we are already at 2 hours and 15 minutes. So I will ask Alan and then Rosemary, and then we will do a final round of responses from the panelists. Alan, please go ahead.
So first of all, I wanted to thank and congratulate the speakers and Arnold, because I found myself enlightened and humbled by hearing what people had to say. I want to ask a question about money and say something about money. And I'll preface this by saying that the leftists, liberal leftists of the West, have a tendency to be very condescending towards religions. And in part, this has a racist origin, because they associate it with superstition and backwardness in their pseudo-rationalist way of thinking. But they have their own religion. It's called economics. If you look at the actual way that economics is organized, It is an exact counterpart of the medieval Catholic Church. It has a hierarchy, it has a doctrine, it has controlling instruments where the capitalist classes of the world, through the IMF and other such institutions, run it. And it has a doctrine. The doctrine is that of market perfection. Market perfection takes the place of God. Total trust in the market is that religion. So the West has nothing to teach people when it comes to backwardness. The second thing is that there's a quiet revolution, two quiet revolutions that are going on in the world, which I think are of enormous importance. One is the Belt and Road Initiative, an alternative trading system, but the other is the emergence of an alternative payment system. The digital yuan and digital systems for exchanging are a fundamental instrument to overcoming the way in which the dollar is used to control who is allowed to exchange with whom. If you think of what the Americans have been doing in the way that they run their imperialist offensive, yes, they use sanctions, and that's what you see. But what they do is they also prevent the emergence of a perfectly natural relation of trading and economic relations between the countries of the global South. And they do this both physically and monetarily. I remember vividly, because of very closely associated with Venezuela, the deep love that the Venezuelan people had for Iran, because the oil, at a time when basically oil production in Venezuela had been completely sabotaged, people risked their lives and took to the high seas, and they were intercepted by Americans. This is piracy on the high seas, is what actually the seizure of Iranian tankers amount to. Now, I don't know where we're at with that, but I think that the payment system is extremely important and something we need to actually have a discussion amongst all the participants, because in my view, if countries like Cuba, Iran, Venezuela, Bolivia, Africa, the rest, African countries, the rest of the world could simply realize the possibilities of mutual trade without interference, this would be a huge step forward. So I want to draw attention to this very quiet but extremely important question of the digital revolution, and ask my question, which is to what extent is Iran participating in the initiatives for alternative trade? Then the other thing is, let's not forget debt. Debt tends to get forgotten, but there's been a discussion in the chat about Argentina's participation in the Belt and Road Initiative, and it's settled with, like many countries, with a huge and utterly dishonorable debt that was incurred by people who had nothing to do with the present government of the country. And Britain plays a huge role in imposing that debt. So I wonder whether there remains an Iranian debt problem. That's the second question. And whether we should be agitating for the relief of that, certainly with Argentina, it should. And then there's one third, final question as the treasurer of the International Manifesto Group I want to make about money, which is, there's a very practical way you can help spread this message, which is visit our donate page and either give us some money, or you can paste that, or even better, make a regular monthly contribution. Now, I want to say we took a very early decision. We are not going to accept corporate funding. We have no large funders, and that's a decision. It's not an accident. We don't take advertising income, and we don't take any income that has origin in any state. So we're completely a grassroots movement that allows this kind of thing to happen. I'm not saying it's the only organization you should give money to. The supporting organizations of this event and others, you could support them. But I'm just urging you, a simple visit to our site will help ensure that we can continue this kind of activity. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Alan. And since Alan's question is about this, I'm just going to ask all the panelists perhaps to name those developments, changes, new initiatives that Iran and other countries have recently taken, which expand the options, economic options for Iran, particularly because the JCPOA talks, it seems to me, are going nowhere. So the sanctions are going to remain. Okay, with that intervention, I'm going to give the last question to Rosemary, and then we will have a last round of responses from the panelists. Rosemary, please go ahead.
Yes, hello everybody. Nice to see a bunch of familiar faces. Comment / question, two comments, questions. One, first to Hamid. I liked almost every single sentence of what you said. And then I had this sinking feeling in my stomach when you talked about controlling capitalism. And I wonder what you meant by that, because it kind of sounds like you think that all we need to do is control capitalism and everything will be okay if we can just pull up our socks and control them. And I think we've seen the difference between the response of Fidel Castro and the response of Hugo Chavez in the moments of the crucial moments of the revolution, where that led. There's no capitalist class in Cuba, whereas the capitalist class exists in Venezuela and Iran, et cetera, all over the world, and the consequences that I don't think capitalism can be controlled. I think it needs to be overthrown. Anyway, I just would be nice if you could clarify that. It was a very brief statement. The second question is about, for all the panelists and perhaps, well, the panelists at this point, what kind of things we can do to overthrow sanctions wherever they exist, because they hurt the people and mostly not the governments that are targeted. And of course, I think that sanctions that the United States has imposed and with their allies have nothing to do with human rights or justice and truth in the world. They have to do with maintaining their economic hegemony, and the sanctions themselves are directed toward maximizing their own economic interests. So yeah, I know that the Fire This Time people in Vancouver have done a lot of very important work in publicizing, doing in our times also Zoom pickets and providing lots of information. But what do the panelists think that we as a group, perhaps that this group is forming, this is a group or the potential to be a group to do a concerted campaign against sanctions, please?
Thank you so much, Rosemary. So final round of responses. I think beginning with Hamid, since your hand is up, and Hamid, one of the questions was directly for you. But other panelists as well, please let me know if you would like to intervene. Go ahead, Hamid.
I start with the last question that was addressed to me, which is a very good question. Actually, it does need explanation, or maybe I should clarify this. I'm not a reformist. I do not believe that what a capitalist world needs is that someone like me or somebody else comes and reforms it. If it was reformable, those known as reformists throughout the history could have done it by now. But we have had that. What I meant was, let me put it maybe in a more simple term. I think this is a transition. Going, a country like Iran, going to where it should go from where it is right now at the moment, it's a process of transition. And what it requires is not immediate substitution of a socialist model, not because this is not a good idea, because it's not that much practical in an immediate sense. In other words, this is what I believe. A revolutionary government is required to control, in that sense, to tax the capitalists, to mobilize the working class, to decide about the economic policies, to map up the international foreign policy, and all that in the hands of a revolutionary class makes it possible to bring the term of control that I used, controlling the capitalists. This is what I actually meant and what I really mean. I think Alan touched a very important issue, very, very important issue at the question of transaction of money, the question of alternative trade. This is a topic that should be dealt with. About the question that how Iran is considering this, I think that we are way behind. We have, until this moment, there is not a clear policy on the side of the government to define that whether the digital money is has to be exploited, other ways of trades should be exploited. And the other, I just want to be, I'm in a rush to be very short about the question that what we can do is, I think, mobilize, educate bring out the freedom fighters to the street, protesting against the sanctions, encouraging and demanding the governments of the sanctioned countries to extend cooperation, because we did talk in this panel about the very important good cooperations already existing between Iran and Venezuela and some other examples. But this is way behind what is expected. I want to encourage that there is a book going to be published on sanctions. I think it's UNAC and the other, that Sanctions Kill organization are organizing that. It is a collection of contributions on this subject, lessons about sanctions, how to deal with sanctions. And so the question that was raised here, I think a lot of it will be answered throughout the articles in that book. Thank you.
That's great, Hamid. Bahman, please go ahead.
Thank you, Erika. Important questions last minute raised. I think we need to address, probably not in this session. One thing that we have to recognize is that sanctions and all those other interventions are in direct violation of UN Charter. And United States is trying to impose what it calls rules-based international order based on their own system of market economy, neoliberalism and all that, and impose it on other nations. The enforcer for that method is actually NATO. US has been trying to replace United Nations with NATO as the enforcer of peace and enforcer of order. So one area, and it is important because during the last National General Assembly of the United Nations, 18 countries met at the Venezuelan mission. I was there actually. Issued a statement, formed a group of friends of Charter of United Nations, which interestingly includes all of the countries that we are talking about, also China and Russia. I think that is an area that we really should focus on and try to strengthen that movement, because we are facing with two possible future orders in the world. One based on United Nations Charter, and the other one based on imperialism, rule-based international order. And the struggle is very critical in this. And I think we should focus on that. As to the Iranian side, within what we can do, one thing, I think in the international order, sorry, before I go there, it's a question of creation of an alternative financial transaction order rather than a SWIFT that is in monopoly control of the United States and imperialist powers that can block countries from exchanging with each other. So focusing on that is also, and in this sense, China and Russia can really help a lot, I think. The last point I want to say is about Iran. I think I'm in full support of what Hamid said. Fighting neoliberalism in Iran is a key element right now. Pushing back the neoliberal class, pushing it back, putting more brakes on them, because they are now putting brakes on the eastward turn of the Iranian government, which is the key to the improvement of the situation inside the country. And they are putting a brake on this move. And I think the focus should be within Iran on the economic battle against neoliberalism right now. That is how I see it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bahman. I think, Mohammed, you want to speak, but before I come to you, Arnold, you are saying that we have a speaker who wants to say something?
Hello. Hi, my name is Saidi Kadir. I'm a Montrealer physician that was supposed to be on the panel. I don't know if I can take my time. I prepared something I'm sorry, I had something, an inconvenience, and I couldn't be present. But I don't know if I can say whatever I have to say. Do I have like 10 minutes or not? It's too long.
What do you want to do, Arnold? We can't hear you. Well, okay. I mean, the thing is that we were about to close.
How about just 3-4 minutes?
How about 3 or 4
minutes?
minutes?
Make your main point, which is very important.
Because I totally understand, and it's really great of you to come, even if it's late. So we really appreciate it. But at the same time, we've been going for 2.5 hours already.
Oh, God. Okay. Okay.
So, yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna. I'm not a very, a prestigious speaker. I'm a claims physician and social activist, mainly in the maintaining the public system of healthcare in Canada. But I wanted to say that today, Cuba is really being a model for all, Cuba has always been dedicated to healthcare for its own people, but now it's a model also for, and was for the third world, but now he's also the model for countries like Canada. So in this ever accelerated neoliberal turn of the 80s, Quebec, Canada, and UK, and even France are introducing market mechanism and gradually increasing privatization in healthcare. According to Marcia Angel and Arnold Relman, two ex-chief editors of USA's most prestigious New England Journal of Medicine, Cuba's problem is a problem of resources, and the US problem is a problem of system. It is now the richest superpower of all times, and by far, with infinite resources, does not provide healthcare for 40 million Americans. To come to the topic today, I see multipolarity favorable to the independence of the people of the world, without which self-determination and freedom are empty words. Speaking of freedom, how many times our free press here has asked why Canada, one of the richest countries of the world, cannot provide enough family doctors for everyone, and why every day I am begged by sick patients for care that I have to refuse. Why in our province, Quebec, where we spend more than $80 billion only in the public healthcare system, we have hundreds of thousands of people on long and dangerous waiting lists for surgeries, specialized consultation, and diagnostic procedures. Why in Quebec we have experienced a hard to express treatment of our elderly during this pandemic. And above all, has the press been able to ask why is it that with all our scientists and resources here, we haven't been able to create a vaccine of our own, and what about our dependency on foreign American corporations like Pfizer for immunizing our population? Why don't we have vaccinal independence? While in Cuba, we have been able to continue to care for the people and better outcomes than Canada, especially before the opening to tourism that was obliged by the sanctions, and at all times better than the States in this pandemic, and has been able to send doctors with excellent level of competence to Italy, badly hit at the beginning of this pandemic, and above all, create a safe and efficient vaccine during a pandemic in 1 year only, while this type of vaccine can easily take 15 years to produce. Please, because not a genetic, and also that it's not a genetic vaccine that is questionable on its safety by many people and scientists. And Cuba has been able to vaccinate its population and send vaccines to countries where our fellow humans couldn't afford the first world vaccines or didn't have access to vaccines, like in Iran, because of sanctions. Why don't we have foreign missions knowing that a pandemic should be fought everywhere at the same time and not only in Canada? The development of vaccine against COVID-19 in Cuba for many of us perfectly exemplifies, and that's what really the essential thing I have to say, the realm of possibilities available to people who benefit of true freedom and independence, specifically freedom from the market diktats that we experience in Canada. Because our hands are tied by laws favoring pharmaceutical companies, for example, and also oil companies and arm companies. Here again, Cuba gives a lesson to the world, to humanity, to us, who need to free ourselves from neoliberalism if we want to access any of our serious challenges. So that's about it.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really great. And we really appreciate the fact that you finally made it.
Yes, sorry.
No, not at all. So I would like to return to and give a final say to any of the panelists who would like to say something. I think, Bahman, is your hand up from before, or did you want to say something?
No, it's from before. Sorry.
Okay, please just take it down. So are there any panelists who would like to respond in any way? Muhammad, there's a funny sign beside your name, but if you want to speak, please go ahead. And then Hamid.
Okay. Can I go ahead now?
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to clear something here. And, you know, I know that everybody here admired the translation of the book and so on. I have to honestly say that this could not be possible without Mr. Abu Talebi's editing my English. So this is what I wanted to emphasize. I said the same thing also in a little book lunch that we had in Tehran due to pandemics. That's what I wanted to say, and thank again Mr. Abu Talebi's help. And I would like to thank everybody here for tonight's event. That's it.
That's
thank
great.
you.
Thank you so much. And I have now two final speakers. I will go to Hamid first and then very fittingly give the publisher of Arnold's book the last word. So Hamid, please go ahead.
Well, thank you. Thank you to you, very professional chairing the meeting, and all the panelists and all those who listen to us. I hope that's this type of discussions will continue. I just wanted to say as the last word that right now that we are discussing, I don't know at this moment or, but these days, the diplomats, so-called diplomats of the United States of America and Europe are pressuring our representatives, the Iranian delegates in Vienna, to get more concessions from us. They put the sanctions and we demand lift the sanctions. And when we go and talk about this, they ask for more concessions. This is the mechanism of their negotiations. This is the mechanism of how they enter and what they pursue in this negotiation. So it's very timely to demand hands off Iran, lift sanctions on Iran. Do not put further pressure to gain and to reach more concessions on Iran. Hands off Iran, lift sanctions on Iran. Thank you very much to all of you.
Okay, great. And Ali has disappeared. So I guess...
I'm here, Radhika. I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Please.
Please.
Kick me out. Sorry.
Ah, excellent. Please go ahead.
Okay, my last words. Thank you, everyone. And I would like to say, Mohammed, you are a great translator, believe me. Thank you.
Okay, folks, that's all. That's very wonderful. And I just want to end by reminding everybody that our manifesto is on this website. So please consider reading, signing, contributing. I would also like to thank once again Arnold August for doing a lot of work to put together this amazing panel, and also to thank our other sponsors, the US Peace Council, the Black Alliance for Peace, and the Canada Files. So thank you very much all, and please watch this space. Please watch for other events that we organize. And perhaps I think, you know, the Manifesto Group and some of these other organizations can collaborate further on the very important work of preventing sanctions, pushing back on sanctions, fighting against this idiotic rules-based international order, I should say very dangerous and destructive so-called rules-based international order, and supporting the initiative taken by countries like China, like Iran, like Cuba, like Venezuela, to support the United Nations and to have a United Nations-based international order. I think that is what the vast majority of the countries and the people of this world need. So thank you again very much to all the speakers, to all the attendees, all the people who asked wonderful, wonderful questions. And see you again sometime soon at another International Manifesto Group event or another initiative to achieve these common goals. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.